गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट. गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है. Today we're going to discuss about the Ukraine and Bangladesh wars. Well, Bangladesh was 1971. This is today. Does it bear a comparison? Right? It might not bear a tactical comparison, but definitely a politico-military comparison. Where did I start all this? I was in discussion with someone on the Ukraine war, how it will end, not end, all that. But then these were the two questions which were, posed to me. I said, what are the lessons that can be drawn from your victories in the wars of 1965 and 1971, which the Russians should apply to Ukraine in terms of intelligence, speed of operations, firepower and troop ratios, political control versus military command, etc., etc., etc. And then, of course, the next important thing, which is, what lessons have you drawn from the involvement of the Americans, right? Uh, on the other side, forcing end of war terms in exchange of money. Very interesting. So I'll go bottom up. Let's talk of the Americans first. Uh, did the Americans have, okay, now, sorry. I thought over this whole thing. Should I compare the 65 and the 71 wars and all that? No. I homed on to the 71 war because I found after a bit of initial study, the 71 war and the Ukraine war bear a lot of similarities. Lot of similarities. It was astounding when I thought of it that way. So I went into these two and I compared these two. So my talk today is going to be all about 71. And of course, this transposing it to Ukraine and see where it goes. It's very difficult to compare two wars which have happened 50 years apart. The international setting is different. Terrain, of course, largely different, completely different, in fact. The geopolitical setting is different. Technologies are different. The political conditions are different and all that. But I found some tremendously interesting similarities. And that's what I thought I'll share with you. The cost of repeating and boring you. But that's like I said, let me start bottom up. What lessons have we drawn from the involvement of Americans on the other side and forcing end of war terms in exchange for money? In the 1971 war, I think the Americans at some point of time were shut out of the game. They didn't have any role to play in the end of term or rather the end of war terms. There was no money involved. It was completely a bilateral agreement, which, the whole story was bilateral in nature. It was reduced to bilateral in being bilateral in nature, and which resulted in a bilateral agreement called the Shimla Agreement in 1972. Look, in the 65 war, there was the Tashkent Agreement, where it was underwritten by the Soviets at that time between India and Pakistan. Prime Minister Lal Bahadur Shastri went there, and he signed this agreement with Field Marshal Ayub Khan, and he died there. We know that. That's history. But unlike that, this was a bilateral agreement with Americans not even given a foot to stand on, didn't have a leg to stand on. They couldn't call terms for a peace. Peace was declared by India. That's something which everyone must understand. And India emerged from that war as complete military victors. And Pakistan was split into two. There is a resemblance to the splitting, because we're looking at a split in Ukraine, but that I'll tackle in the end. Split into two. So that question actually answers itself, you know, automatically. But the first part is important. What are the lessons that can be drawn from our victories? Intelligence, speed of operations, firepower, all that. Okay. I think that is something which we need to go into in detail. Let me give the fundamental similarity. You're looking at the map of Ukraine, and let me make it a little bigger, and you can see my face also. Look at the map of Ukraine. When you look at the map of Ukraine, look what are the geopolitical construct. You have Ukraine as an existential threat to Russia, and Russia in turn was an existential threat to Ukraine ever since they've split. And with the expansion of NATO eastwards and supporting Ukraine, USA and EU became the external supporters of this war willy nilly. And then they fought this war through Ukraine. We all know that now. That's the construct which we've all understood in a simplistic manner. But look at the case of East Pakistan. The same thing. East Pakistan was an existential threat to India because as Pakistan and as our virtually our enemy state at that point of time, it could cut off the northeast. It could create problems in the northeast, which it did during the Naga insurgency. It posed an existential threat to us. Equally, India was an existential threat to Pakistan. In this case, the external support could have come from China or USA. It materialized from USA in a significant manner. But China was shut out. And we'll come to it how it was shut out. And that was purely a politico military plan which was executed. USA was the external supporter in two ways. Let me clarify that. First, it provided the wherewithal and the war machinery which Pakistan needed to execute a war. And later, it tried to come and intervene in the proceedings. The first, it succeeded in giving the wherewithal to Pakistan to fight this war. And that was over a long term. But the second, it was not allowed to do so. We'll talk of that also. Okay, now so having seen the geopolitical construct which roughly approximates the same, let's see the thrust lines. Everyone knows this thrust line. These were the initial thrust lines. There were two thrust lines towards Kiev, one flowered out from Crimea to get hold of Kherson and those Mariupol and those areas, and one came out of Donetsk. After 2 months, 2.5 months, the Kiev was withdrawn and they came swung to the south, and the whole story is gone so long. So long. It's on, and continue to be on. Okay. Now look at the Bangladesh story. I'll make this a little bigger so that you can have a look at it, because unless you understand these maps, you don't get to see, where's this map business? Is it like this? No. 1 minute. Yeah. Unless you see the maps, you don't get to understand the whole story. Yeah, this is a better one. Right? Now, when you look at it, there were 4 thrust lines which India adopted. The first was from Jessore, the second north through Rangpur, the third through Sylhet, and the fourth northeast from Brahmanbaria. I'll not go into the dispositions, troops, and all that. Each were approximately a corps-sized offensive. 2 corps was from in the Jessore-Kulna corridor. 33 corps from the north, Rangpur, 20 div spearheading. Sylhet was 101 communication area. And Brahmanabari, Agartala, that axis was 4 corps. The interesting part of this, which I want to highlight when the map is big and nice, is that all these four thrusts were through river corridors. They were astride the river corridors. They were, not across the river corridors. And that's an important thing which one has to, understand in this whole construct. Okay. Now, having said that, let's go ahead. The Ukraine war has gone over for 100 days. 20% of Ukraine territory is now occupied by Russian forces. 6.9 million refugees have fled to neighboring nations. People call it a victory. Russia is on the verge of a victory, military victory, and Ukraine has lost. Just think. In 14 days, the Indian Armed Forces created a nation, and 10 million refugees were returned home thereafter. 71. And we not only created a nation, we split the nation. And we secured a lasting peace for the next 20 years. Till the hybrid story started in the 90s. This is something which people don't understand. The Western mind doesn't understand this. Wars are meant to get peace. Wars are not to continue and continue and continue. As Clausewitz said, war is continuation of politics by other means. If war has continued for 3 years, politics have failed. Alternately, the war has failed to give the stage for politics to go to peace. You have to create the conditions for peace. That's what armies are meant for. There is a fundamental difference between the Ukraine war and the Bangladesh war. Okay, I mean, there are many reasons why Russia didn't do what it did, all that, but that's a later day story. The fact is, this is the fact after 3 years. Okay. Now, what I did was something very interesting. Have a look at what the thing. I left the Ukraine thrust lines in a similar manner, and I turned the Bangladesh map 90 degrees. Now you see both the maps, how similar they are. The thrust lines are also similar, eerily similar. Okay. And the way this operation went is also the planning process, everything for this is also eerily similar. And that makes it interesting. Okay. And you have to understand this. Creating a nation in 14 days is not easy. But the fact is that something similar was attempted by Russia. Have a look at the map again, right? Russia initially attempted to hit Kiev and grab Kiev to affect, regime change. If that had happened, a lot of things would have changed. This war would have been completely different. But that didn't happen. Why didn't it happen? In my own opinion, Russia lost the war when it withdrew from Kiev. Okay. I mean, that's my opinion. People might say no to it. People might feel different, but that's okay. And I mentioned it then that this war is a war which will not produce results. There'll be no victors in this war. Everyone will lose except USA, which has been laughing all its way to the bank. They made money out of it. Let's be very clear. Okay. So, what's the difference between both these campaigns? The difference was the extensive planning which went into the whole story. Both these campaigns, the similarity is, didn't start when the war started. You look at Ukraine, the whole story started in 2014 with the Euromaidan. And then Russia going into Georgia, Crimea, NATO deployment, or rather, Ukraine to be part of NATO, NATO's eastward expansion. A lot of countries were taken in to NATO. The EU um, effort to give Ukraine membership, or vice versa, whichever way you like to look at it. All this happened. And then the war took place. And Russia repeatedly saying, no, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. This war was actually, in my way of looking at it, uh, has been in the offing ever since USSR broke up. It turned into military conflict, a series of military conflicts, 2014. What happened in 2022 was a spike in this war. Similarly, the Bangladesh story didn't start in 1971 in December. It started much before. It started in 1947 when Pakistan was created. We had a war then. But luckily or unluckily, it didn't spread to the east. We had a war in 65, which was not fought in the east at all. It was only in the west. And then this happened. And this didn't happen overnight. Many people miss the equations. This happened, they started in 1970 with a cyclone called Cyclone Bola, or the whatever you call it. Yeah, Cyclone Bola, where people died by the millions. And the Pakistanis didn't bother about the Bangladeshis. And from then on, actually, Pakistan lost East Pakistan. And then the elections happened, where they were wiped out. Bhutto's party was wiped out, and the Muslim League was wiped out, and everyone. The vote in East, West Pakistan was split, whereas in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, it was consolidated. It all went to the Awami League and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He would have been made the prime minister. Nothing probably would have happened, but he wasn't. He was jailed, and atrocities started through Operation Searchlight. That started early 71. Immediately after the elections, Mujib's being put in behind bars and all that. Elections were in March 71. And then refugees started streaming into India. There were a lot of reports of atrocities. There were similar equations within Ukraine, which many people don't understand. When Putin says Nazis and radicalism, everything, a large element of truth in it. The Euromaidan was itself, we know now, was instigated and planned. The Euromaidan protests, the Spring Revolution, whatever you call it, that right, which the Americans keep doing. Color revolutions, yeah, that's the word. So there's a similarity. And when Russia started the whole story, now there are a lot of refugees out. The difference between the two in this case is that the problem of refugees and all, everything started from within Pakistan, thanks to the Pakistan army. It is the other way around in Ukraine, without going into much detail because that doesn't matter much. But then once the whole thing started, by March 71, April 71, April, May 71, everyone in India at that time knew war was a certainty. We all knew. I was just a youngster, I was in school, but even then I knew that war is a certainty. Okay, now let's look at the political military planning here. As history tells us, uh, the government then and Mrs. Indira Gandhi wanted the Indian army to go in to Bangladesh in June, July at that time. And she was asking, Field Marshal Manekshaw, the army chief, to prosecute operations into Bangladesh, East Pakistan. He refused. That's well known. But why? What are the planning process? That's more important. He felt that Indian army was not trained for what was expected of it fully. So he said, I need time for training. He wanted to equip the army for whatever he wanted as per his plan, larger plan. Right? And then he wanted to hone his soldiers. He laid a lot of emphasis on soldiers to face what was expected out of them. He wanted ammunition. He said, let me build up ammunition. And then came the most important thing. And for that, I'll take, value of the map once again. You look at the Bangladesh or East Pakistan map, full of rivers. We all know that. June, July, monsoon seasons, all these rivers were in spate. We couldn't have crossed these rivers or done what we had to do. Fundamentally, what did we do in these four thrust lines? Eventually, we bypassed all fortified positions of Pakistan. We never fought them head on. There were no pitched battles, barring in a few places. It was ceaseless mobility, speed of operations, bypass, circumvent, go from the rear, and that post fell automatically. Why could we do it? If we had gone in June, we couldn't have done it. Because we went in December, the water flow in these rivers are less. The whole countryside is dry. In fact, 2 days back, I flew over that area. It's still dry. You could get a campaign season of 3 to 4 months to do whatever you had to do. That's one important thing. The second important thing, your plan and your terrain matched. The second important thing was that around the time December, when this actual operations was to take place, the passes with China would close. That was a very, very important consideration, when you talk of this whole story. In June, July, the passes would open. If we had gone into Pakistan at that point of time, China could have intervened directly. Could have. Whether they wanted to or not, different story. And then we would have been caught between China and East Pakistan. But by going in December, when Natula, Jalepla and all these passes were closed, the Atung Valley was snowed in, China could do nothing. Or nothing could happen from China. So we could deal with East Pakistan alone. USA could not react because of the speed of our operations. Now, how does that compare with Ukraine? Look, everyone knew the Ukraine operations was on. There's nothing new about it. Everyone, including the West, and everyone knew that sooner or later Russia will get in. The ch- thing was whether they'll do it or not. So, what was their plan? When did this operation start? They had time to plan. Russia had a lot of time to plan. They probably had 4, 5, 6 months to plan this operation. Did they plan it well? That's the question which one has to ask. Did they plan it well in terms of terrain? All that. What is the political military planning? They went in December. They went in March, April. I remember that. Leading into a condition called Rapustita. When they went in and almost at the tail end of winter, with the oncoming summer, or rather, as the snow melted, the whole ground would have turned slushy, and it did turn slushy, and maneuver was impossible. Resultantly, their thrust lines were just along roads. They were, pencil pricks. They were not maneuvers. They were not bypassing. They took on all Ukrainian posts almost head on. And Ukrainians could retreat them in stages. And that is why in the first 10, 15, 20 days of this offensive, you found that Russia was halted everywhere. Their logistics was also not good because their logistics was based on trains. It was not built for maneuver. The weather itself and time and all that. Then the major thing is, the aim. What are the political aim? In 1971, the political aim was very clear. Get to Dhaka first. Avoid all this thing. Let Dhaka fall. Or get to the guts of East Pakistan. Once you get to the guts of East Pakistan and, Pakistani positions are outflanked, then they'll fall. And then, maybe Dhaka was not the initial aim, but the center of gravity was always Dhaka. The Germans have a very great, fantastic term for it, Schwerpunkt. The center of gravity. The Schwerpunkt of the Bangladesh war or offensive was Dhaka. Whereas the Schwerpunkt of Ukraine war was Kiev. But they didn't prepare for it. In terms of weather, in terms of training, they didn't train for it. And that was obvious. Or they lost track of the training. Then they attempted an airhead in the beginning. Right at the outset. I'll establish airhead, link up, all that. The airhead didn't function well. It got, it was a massive blunder. And then, of course, the thrust didn't have momentum. It should have been the other way around. Generate momentum through the thrust lines, threaten Kiev, and then put airhead in to build up. But they did it inverse. Was it poor military planning? I leave it to your imagination. I don't understand why this happened. In any case, it was a botched up airhead, it was a botched up maneuver. If the way I look at it, if the Russians had planned in some logical manner, they could have probably taken over Kiev long back. They attempted all thrusts without getting results anywhere. Yeah, they've got 20% territory, but that's a contested territory, and they're not going to have it. It's not okay. So the politico-military aim was not clear. Whereas, what happened between Field Marshal Manekshaw and Mrs. Indira Gandhi was very clear, and she went by him. He trained. And on this, I have no doubt. I wrote about this 3 years back. The political military fusion expected out of the Russians was not there. In fact, on the other hand, I felt that the political military fusion of the Ukrainians was better. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to fight together. Underarmed, different armed, whatever you call it, well prepared, ill prepared, they fought better. Right? So I think that was important. The second thing is international support, which Russia lacked. Russia could never generate international support for its own cause. Compare it to what Mrs. Indira Gandhi did. Mrs. Indira Gandhi went to all capitals in Europe, Russia, USA, and explained what the current status was and why it was important that Pakistan was reined in and do something about it. Once that didn't happen, she came back, signed the Moscow Pact, and then went in. But everyone knew India's stance. That's the point. Did everyone know Russia's stance? Why Russia did what it did? Did everyone know what Ukraine will do or how will it respond? Did everyone know how NATO will respond? So I think in the international arena, international support, uh, there was a lot of leeway, which it's a lot of things which were not done. Yeah, the Russians and the Ukrainians and the Europeans and USA will sing different tunes today. But 3 years back, did they have a chance to put their views across? Having put their views across and having said, okay, I have to go and take over Kiev, were the Russians single-minded about doing it? The southern thrust could never have reached Kiev under anyone's imagination. And mind you, you're talking of this terrain where Manstein, Manstein, right? I've read this, did his famous backhand plan. This was the place, Kursk, where the Russians, or rather the USSR, at that time, through the greatest mobile battle or the tank battle in the history, in Kursk, defeated Germans. And at that time, it was said that over 2,000 Russian tanks and 1,400 odd German tanks were in motion in 5 concentric circles around Kursk. You look at the battles of Kharkov, it used to be called Kharkov, now Kharkiv. The first, second, third battle. People went up and down this terrain. They were not done at the time when the Russians did it. Did the Russians want to do this entire terrain in this time to get surprise? Probable. But if that be so, their plan should have been completely different. Now, after that, you got 20% terrain. Yeah, whoa, you can keep going with the terrain. The battle was lost then. I mean, after that, Russia has only been doing a holding action. You lost 1 lakh people either side, both sides. I mean, then figures can vary. You would say 90,000, fine. But what's the difference between 90,000 and 1 lakh troops lost, lives lost on either side? Okay. Then the next issue of local support. In Bangladesh, we had complete local support. 100% local support. There was no case of no local. Did Russia have that kind of local support? It had. still has in the Russian speaking areas. Did it generate local support in Kiev? Did it generate political instability in Kiev? After all, when all this was happening, you know, in Pakistan, we cashed in on the political instability in Pakistan at that time. There was no political instability in Ukraine when the war started. Even now, there's no political instability in Ukraine. In fact, if anything, ever since Russia went into the war, I thought the political stability within Ukraine has increased. The opinion within Ukraine has hardened. Whether it is correct, not, yeah, well, that's a different story. The people are very clear. Right. And then, of course, the value of a multi-pronged support, offensive. A multi-pronged offensive will yield results if it converges onto a point. And that didn't happen. In Bangladesh, we never fought small wars. Today, Bakmo, Yewo, Chota Mota villages are being taken and, being drummed as big wars. Ukraine also tried a counterattack last year. And here, the Westerners, I think, did a foolish thing by goading Ukraine to go into a counteroffensive. They went, and whatever advantage they had, they lost. In fact, if Ukraine had held on to strategic defensive at that point of time, the whole story would have been different. I think Ukraine also, NATO people also messed it up big time. That is why they are also not in a position to, bring this war to closure. At this point of time, I want to get something else in. What is the Pakistan strategy at that point of time? The Pakistan strategy was to win the war in the West by an offensive, and that would provide defense in the East. And their next thing is delay the war to enable Russia and China to intervene. Overall, ours was exactly the opposite. Strategic defensive in the West, offensive in the East. I don't know whether Russia had such a plan at all. I'm not privy to it. Could they have done something else? Could they have generated a thrust somewhere else? I thought Mr. Putin was always constrained by this term called special military operations. He never had declared a war. Even now, it's not a war as per him. It's only a special military operation. It's a different thing that the special military operation has gone for 300 days. So I thought there were a lot of issues which, we have to, when you reflect on this, you find that, look, it's not whatever happened in Russia is not something which is great. But let's look at it from a few other issues, few other aspects. What happened between, the way Russia went about doing its entire business. You look at it, the economic planning of Russia was faultless. They prepared for this war from a long time. They very well knew that they have to get into a war. The way they went about ensuring that sanctions won't hurt them, the way they went about ensuring that their economic recovery was going to be nice is fantastic. Let's not have any doubts about it. If only they had translated this kind of planning to their military sphere, this whole story would have been different. And we have to remember, Russia started with a huge advantage in this campaign. It's a self-sufficient nation. It has resources, gas, oil, minerals, you name it, technology. Even now, it is Russia which can actually compete with USA in any walk of technology. Not even Chinese. Chinese don't have a lot of technologies. They had manpower and experience. They had. But did they use it? No. And that brings me to that point. A lot of problems which Russia faced in this multi-pronged thrust initially was because of conscripts. Just think of a nation which has to go into war with conscripts, untrained, unbedded in, unaccustomed to death and the deprivations of battle. And later on, use mercenaries like the Prigozhin and his army to carry out attacks. They didn't have infantry. So somewhere you see that that part of planning also I thought Russia went awry. It's a different thing. Technology, citizen warriors, small and cheap technologies, drone warfare has all evolved over the past 3 years and the battlefield has changed. But if this battle had been carried out with the same, thinking like what happened in East Pakistan, the story I think would have been different. Maybe in a different time, with different whole stories. And that brings me to the point, the Russian conscripts, the way they didn't work, whereas on the Ukrainian side, they worked. The Russian conscripts, Agnivirs, is there an equation? It sounds a warning bell to the Indian army. It sounds a warning bell to the government of India. This is a major lesson. From then to now, Russia has been bled. The fact that Russia could withstand this bleeding, this constant bloodletting, is because of the fact that it is a resource rich nation. But now they are running out of manpower. At some point of time, the lack of manpower will tell on them. It's already telling on them. That is why they've had to get Nepalese as mercenaries. They've had to use North Korean troops for whatever reason. Right? So they've had problems on this count. By using Agniveer, will we get into this problem? I think we'll get into a bigger problem. But on that score, I will talk on a different day with someone else. Agniveer is not the thing. The political preparation for this war was very high in Russia. It is the military preparation which I think let them down. So the major lesson is politico-military fusion. Okay. We had it then in 1971. I'll ask a question to ourselves. Do we have it now? Do we have it now? And that question begs an answer. Why could Russia sustain this war effort for over 3 years? It's had problems, but it could sustain it. Primarily because it had a huge defense industrial base. What people forget was, yeah, USA has a huge defense industrial base, there's no doubt about it. But so does Russia. Ever since the USSR days. And Russia has been the biggest arms supplier to the world to many countries, including India and Africa and even China. They had these capacities, and these capacities became the surge capacities for Russia to prosecute war. Otherwise, how do you maintain these capacities? Look at the Europeans, they're struggling. They had equivalent capacities at the end of the Second World War. But they didn't go in for exports. Their exports were at best lethargic and globally. All kinds of nonsense. They'll put all kinds of problems even in their exports. So no one went to them. They were very costly. As their export orders kept dwindling and they went into liberalism, forgot, completely let their colonies go, the defense industrial base has collapsed. Their armies got degraded. Today they are struggling. They're struggling. Russia is a great example for us of how to make a defense industrial base, how to create an export complex, how to use the capacity of that export complex for surge capacity during war and long term sustenance. Are we heading there? And for that, you have to invest into defense. Here we are looking at our political masters who are shy of even investing 2% of our GDP into defense. Unless you invest more than 2 to 3% of your GDP into defense and indigenize and make Atmanirbharta proper, you will not get export orders. If you think one BrahMos and one attacks will give you export orders and that is the end of the story, sorry. What you need is ammunition. Do you have the surge capacity for ammunition? You will not have that surge capacity for ammunition till such time you produce ammunition and export it. We produce ammunition. I'm not saying for one moment that we can't sustain a long war. We can, but the effort required to sustain that war will be very high. It will be very high because we don't have that kind of political thinking. We don't even have that kind of military thinking. I'm saying this with a lot of responsibility. And this is not something which I'm saying off the cuff. And I'm not against the present hierarchy or the present government or the present ruling party. No. You see, this problem has started from the 90s. A major issue which we have to learn from the Bangladesh war. 65 onwards, our defense budgets were touching 4% of our GDP. We were a poor nation then. We had to live for food from ship to mouth. But despite that, that poor government and that poor nation of that time ensured that defense expenditure touched 4%. What the preparation we did from 65, or rather 63, really speaking, 63 to 71 stood us in good stead when we broke Bangladesh, we broke East Pakistan away from West Pakistan. Not overnight, it happened over a period of 9 to 10 years. After that, our defense budgets have only gone down. That scares me. We've gone back to those days of 1962, and that too at a time when we are supposed to be heading towards being the third largest economy in this world. We want to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean. We want to be a global stage player. All that. Is our military planning in sync with the reality of war, which could be thrust on us any day? I think we have a lot to think. While it's easy for us to gloat over our past of 1971 and what we did and what Russia couldn't do now, equally we should see what Russia has been able to do for the past 3 years. There's a lot to learn. What we did in Bangladesh won't be repeated unless we put in 9 years of hard work. Because we don't have that kind of a defense industrial base, neither, and we are diluting our manpower. And what's more, our neighborhood is up in arms against us. We have problems which we didn't have then. The geopolitical construct of that time was different from now. Let's talk a bit of USA. Will USA come and stand next to us in the next war? I don't know. I mean, to expect USA to come and fight on our behalf anywhere is, I think, out of the question. We have to do everything on our own. If USA gives us intelligence and certain amount of wherewithal, fine. Otherwise, we are on our own. Will Russia come? Again, a question mark. Given that it has deep ties with China and it is improving its ties with Pakistan. These are the realities with which you have to look at this whole story. Can we guarantee ourselves that tomorrow there will not be a war with either China or Pakistan? Everyone talks about this two front war. Do we have to prepare differently? Of course, we have to prepare differently. I keep saying India's got the capability to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty every day. But to be a great power, we have a long way to go. And that's what I thought I'll put across to you. If you people have liked this video, do press the like button. And you could subscribe to Gunner Shot. And I do hope this goes into those people in Europe and the West who are looking at it. And I'm sure I'll get a reaction from there. And I'm prepared to answer and do a follow-up episode live with anyone who wants to quiz me on the Russian campaign and the Bangladesh campaign. To come to an end, where do I see this Russia-Ukraine war going and ending? Just think. Like Pakistan was split into two, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Ukraine will end a split country. It will get split. Call it what you want. Will it be East Ukraine, West Ukraine? We don't know. What will be? That's the thing which we can discuss about. But it's going to be a split country. The split country earlier brought peace. The current split will not bring peace. It might lead to the next war. Unless leaders rise above their own stature and say enough is enough and let's have peace. Thank you. Now I'll take questions. Yeah. And if you like my channel, please subscribe to it. And if you're from Europe or Wrestling, you'll ask me which subject you want me to talk on. For you, who's there in the West, you might like to hear an Indian viewpoint, which is quite different from the thinking what happens in Russia or in the West. After a month of Trump, ain't it clear that he's getting Europe and China and Canada together while we dream China will sink, etc., etc.? Look, if you see Trump's focus, Trump is focusing on China. On that, I never had a doubt. Why I don't have a doubt is that's what the Chinese feel. Okay, Chinese feel so. So let's not. Will Trump be able to get all of them together? I doubt. So we're going into a fractured world. In a fractured world, everyone is on his own. There is deglobalization happening. Whatever has happened in globalization happened over a 30-year period. So deglobalization has started with the pandemic. It's going to happen over the next 10 years, increasingly. And in this, nations will have to now look inward, which China is doing. What is inside China is not great. And this is not my view. This is the Chinese view. You'll not believe it. But I'm going to talk about the Chinese internal wars day after tomorrow. Small things which tell you the problem of China. Okay. So let's not, we shouldn't live in a false world. That's the point. Okay, let me take some questions. Yeah. Yeah. The biggest lesson is maneuver with firepower. Russian army during the first phase only maneuver without much firepower. During second phase, it used. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head in some fashion. But I think in both cases, their maneuver and firepower was lacking. Both cases. Maneuver and firepower have to complement each other. One can't live on its own. Okay. Uh, Yeah, given a comparative in the present, Russia occupies the northern and southeastern districts of Ukraine. Equivalence would be Bharat's occupation of Rangpur. No, look, I would suggest to you, Akash, just forget about going into Rangpur and Chittagong. You can't do it, and not should not be done. I don't think you should keep asking this question again and again. Yeah, you can talk about occupying territory. You should remember occupying a territory brings its people. It's not easy to do. Yes, but in the current case, Russia can occupy the territory because they have a Russian majority. Okay. But if they go ahead, they are going into difficult terrain. They might get 1 odd kilometer, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers here and there. That's it. While we have films like Kashmir Files and Chava to remind Indians of their history, it's time a film is made on 1971 war to remind Bangladeshis of their history. I agree with you completely. Okay, now let me see again. Which are the questions? I see a lot of. Uh, in the present, Bangladesh is in desperate need of a rap on the knuckles. The only reason for our patience is probably due to the expected good conduct of the Bangladesh military. Yeah, you're right. The Bangladesh military is holding up. I heard there was a recently attempt at a coup or something like that. I think that has been negated. There's always divisions within the Bangladesh army. Okay, I yeah, so brilliant analysis, but Russia really got the regions where Russian population is more and are holding on to it. Why do you find fault with it? You know why I find fault with it? Because the basic premise was wrong. If their basic premise was to consolidate the Russian speaking areas from the start and get hold of them, and no more. War aim was that. End of story. No talk. No talk. But that was not their aim. Their aim was to topple Kiev and you know do regime change. You given that aim, that larger aim to the world, that I will take over this country through regime change. You failed at it. You failed at it for many reasons, which I've explained. Now it doesn't matter whether you hold on to this or not. The larger geopolitical message you have sent across to people is I will do this, might do this again. That means you created long-term enmity. Okay. And that to me is a huge problem. Now let me show something else which I did mention. I knew I'll get a thing like this. Can Russia win the peace by splitting Ukraine? That is a question which people have to ask. Vijay, I hope you're sorry, Bishi. I hope you're understanding this. If it can't, my view is it can't. People talk, but there's my view. Macron now talking tough on Russia. Is he hoping to put France in pole position to steer an independent Europe away from USA? Won't France be in danger if Germany rearms due to Ukraine warfare? All this are right, Macron, Manoj fan. Just wait. On Wednesday, I'm going to do a podcast with John Helmer, and all these issues will talk. We'll talk of all this, the dangers of Europe. Okay. Is there any truth in Zelensky's and NATO's fear of Putin for USSR again? Would that be possible? Look, the way the geopolitics has gone about, everything is possible. There's no doubt about it. Why? Because the initial missteps have led to 3 years of war. Now to convert that, then Russia went and teamed up with China. I mean, it's not a state secret. And then there are more battle lines. Now, when great powers align like this, see, Russia, China, USA have always been the great power triangle. Who two of them with one against one was untenable equation. No one would be comfortable with it. So USA will never be comfortable with that equation. They'll break it. They'll break it by trick or treat. That's coming as I see it. Because at the end of the day, they have the best power, global power, when you compare to Russia and China. Right? I mean, you might say what you want, but that's the fundamental of this whole story. Right? So, for that matter, for that reason, NATO will always fear Putin. I said, you need statesmanship to come up. Is Trump a statesman? He's trying to be. Is Putin a statesman? He might have been. He had his chances. Okay. I don't see any statesman in Europe. Is China that chap is statesman? Hardly. We don't have that kind of world leaders who can take a call. I mean, good, bad, or ugly, Trump is our best bet. Look, I will take on questions only concerning this thing, the rest during open hour. Why is Russian foreign minister so silent at this time? Normally, he used to give statements regularly. Are they waiting and watching for things to settle in the West? Look, tomorrow is the talk in Riyadh. So let's see between the State Department and the Russian team, rather the US and the Russian teams, what will happen. So it will start tomorrow. Lavrov has played his cards smart. Okay, after Putin, he's played his cards very smartly. So he's waiting. Look at Russia. They want 30% of Ukraine to end war. USA is earning minerals for help. They did to Ukraine. Had it been India, they would have returned everything. India. I don't think you should talk like that. We bought peace. We bought peace. And consistent people took the decisions based on the conditions at that point of time. With all this, will either Russia or USA, Ukraine get peace? I don't know. I don't think so. So China budgeted 3 times that of Bharat defense even in bad economic times in India. Does this indicate they also anticipate war? Look, China has got 3 times the commitment as a global entity. So I don't bother about it. And they have problems in Korea. They have problems in Taiwan. They have problems in South China Sea, and they have global ambitions. In fact, for what they are doing, I think they'll fall short of budget. Are you expecting a war between India and Bangladesh? No, it will not happen. Yesterday, I did this thing. I'll put it out tomorrow, day after again, that clip. Uh, there are people in Bangladesh today who are talking peace. Some of the editorials have started talking. 6 months back, no one was prepared to write the fact that India and Bangladesh have to live together. Today, people have started writing. So I am very sure, and even Professor Yunus, he said India and Bangladesh have to be at peace with each other. So some sense is coming up. Let's see. Mm. So if West gives up Ukraine, will other unresolved geopolitical conflicts reignite? Because now everyone will think of West of weak, and it's high time to get back there. See, the whole problem, Manoj, is the issue of lack of leadership. Like, Mr. Putin has put himself in a corner, and he's being painted as a warmonger. The Europeans are weak, very weak, whether it's Starmer or Macron. Macron's government itself might go any day. His government is unstable. Germany doesn't have a government today. It's in contraction, it's in recession. UK तो छोड़ो, वो ज़्यादा बोलता है. So they are in a problem. So this I don't see any way this problem will end for anyone in a good way. The only way, again, is what Mr. Trump is doing. It might be crazy, but that's the only hope. And it's not a strong hope. वो भी बता रहा हूँ. Isn't China PLA forces stretched too thin? Yes, they are. I don't think they're in a shape to fight, and I don't think they have the capability of fighting. That's my whole story. Yeah, Modi doesn't scream at China the way Zelensky screams at Russia. One is homegrown patriot, the other is foreign installed puppet. Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of logic in what you're saying. Zelensky was no one, being a nightclub dancer, he became a thing. So he was propped up and all that. So I think we'll leave it at that. Divakar, thanks a lot. I hope I spoke sense, and I would like you to show this to your friends in Ukraine and give me a feedback. I'll be grateful. Yeah, what certification preparation I should I do for defense manufacturing, as I'm from non-science background? I think we can speak separately, because this is not the way. Any industry can take part in defense manufacturing. You can go through startups. If you're a startup, you can go through the startup route, which I think is the easier route today. Yeah. In the current situation, what do you think the US plan is for Bangladesh? US has no plan for Bangladesh. I must tell you this. US, you heard President Trump saying, let Modi take care of it. So you'll find that increasingly, that's why the editorials are coming out in Bangladesh of peace with India. If EU wants support Ukraine for long war, will France put pressure on India to sell arms again? No, all that is out of question. France knows what India is, and France is a country which will look after itself. Beyond a point, it will not do anything. Please make one episode on India and Canada relations and future. I did speak of this with Tahir Gora, Yogesh, and I will do it again. I'll speak to him, and I'll do it with someone from Ukraine, Canada only. And if you can tell me someone from Canada who's prepared to speak, I will take him, and at least he'll give me the ground situation. My question is, why is Russia so desperate for a Su-57 deal? Paisa. As simple as that. Yeah, even if Russia wins and Ukrainians accept Russian claims, do you think peace will last long? Will Ukrainians forget the humiliation? Won't they want? Yeah, it's not going to be an easy peace. There'll be some ceasefire, but it won't be peace. There'll be no settlement. There'll be no territorial settlement. There'll be some uneasy kind of a LOC kind of a thing or armistice line or something like that they'll manufacture. There'll be they'll clear a zone 4 5 kilometers here and there to say this will be the ceasefire line and armistice zone or something like that. There are people already talking of it. In fact, I've done a video yesterday. Tomorrow morning, have a look at it. You will see the conditions of ceasefire and monitoring and all that. I put it out. What a spectacular narration comparing two different geographical locations. Outstanding, sir. I could visualize war while you are narrating different. Thanks a lot, Sanjay, for this compliment. My whole idea was to tell people that look, we have to understand where we come from and where we have to go. That's more important. So, with a bipartisan approach in US diplomacy, geopolitics has become unpredictable and unsustainable. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. There are talks or rather rumor of Bhutan merging with India. There'll be only rumors. Nothing will happen. Don't worry. Even if it dreams, how would our army? Why should our army prepare for it if Bhutan will merge with India? If I mean, let's take a hypothetical situation. If Bhutan merges with India, what will happen? You'll go and take over the territorial integrity of Bhutan. It's your state after all. So you'll deploy wherever you feel China can come in. If that happens, China will say we can kiss its charge goodbye because there are issues for China in that. I mean, as an Indian, I wish that. If that happens, China is in trouble. That Chumbi Valley will be pinched out. You can reorder that border completely. Then instead of Chumbi Valley coming this side, you have to start looking that side. I've seen Chumbi Valley from both sides. Okay, that's why. Yeah, yeah. I saw Indian Army in Bhutan. Yeah, Indian Army maintains a training team in Bhutan. It's not now. It's been maintaining for the past 50 years. I've been in Bhutan and as part of the training team in 1982, 83. Okay, it's not nothing new. We've been there from then. So it's not nothing is so simple, Lata. And for all, that China will walk over all that nonsense. Kuch nahi hoga. Don't worry. Okay, thanks a lot. I think I've finished uh, with all your questions, at least those which are pertinent to this. Your other questions, I'll take it on a different time. Thank you. Good evening and Jai Hind. Tomorrow we're going to talk of Ukraine war again uh, with General Dushyant Singh and General Jagatbir Singh. And we'll talk of the end game in Ukraine war and as the way we look at it. Okay. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Good evening and Jai Hind to all of you.